The classroom aboard the Galactic Unity Station hummed with the usual chaos of mixed-species education. Dr. Sarah Chen stood at the front, her human frame dwarfed by the towering Vexian instructor beside her. She was the new xenobiology assistant, fresh from Earth's Colonial Academy, and today marked her first day working with the Predator Species Youth Program. The children sat in specialized chairs designed for their various anatomies. There were 4 Crithian cubs, their scaled bodies gleaming under the artificial lights, each one barely reaching Sarah's waist, but possessing jaws that could crush titanium. 2 young Vorash, feline-like hunters from a high-gravity world, watched her with slit pupils that tracked every movement she made. And then there was little Zek, a solitary Threxian juvenile whose species was renowned across 7 sectors as apex ambush predators. Sarah's supervisor, Professor Threndix, a 4-armed Galean with compound eyes, had been droning on about safety protocols for the past 20 minutes. The predator cubs were getting restless. She could see it in the way their claws flexed, the subtle shifts in their postures, the barely contained energy that all young hunters possessed. Then something went wrong with the ceiling-mounted holographic projector. It flickered, sparked, and went dead with a pathetic wheeze. The lesson on ecosystem balance would have to wait. Professor Threndix let out an exasperated huff through his breathing slits. The projector was mounted nearly 10 feet up, far out of reach for most species. He began tapping at his wrist console, muttering about calling maintenance. Sarah glanced up at the projector, then at the mounting bracket jutting from the wall beside it. Without thinking much about it, she walked over to the wall. The predator cubs watched her with sudden interest, their previous boredom evaporating. She reached up, grabbed the bracket, and pulled herself up with easy confidence. Her fingers found purchase on a ventilation grating. Then, in a fluid motion that came from years of rock climbing back on Earth, she pushed off and reached higher, grabbing onto a support beam. Within seconds, she had scaled the wall and was perched beside the ceiling-mounted device, her fingers working to check its connections. The classroom had gone completely silent. Sarah didn't notice at first. She was focused on the projector, finding the loose power coupling and clicking it back into place. The device hummed to life and she smiled with satisfaction. She glanced down to tell Professor Threndix it was fixed, and that's when she saw them. Every single predator cub was standing, staring up at her with expressions of absolute wonder. Their eyes were wide, their mouths hanging slightly open. Zek, the Threxian, had his climbing claws fully extended, something she'd been told only happened during hunting excitement. Before she could say anything, the smallest Crithian cub, a female named Siska, suddenly leaped upward. Her powerful legs launched her nearly 5 feet into the air, her small claws reaching desperately toward the ceiling. She fell short, landing on all 4s with a grunt of determination. Then another cub jumped, and another. Within seconds, all the predator cubs were leaping, jumping, trying to reach the ceiling that Sarah had touched so casually. The 2 young Vorash were attempting to climb the furniture, their retractable claws scarring the reinforced materials. Zek had actually made it halfway up the wall before his claws lost purchase, and he slid back down, only to immediately try again. Professor Threndix's voice translator was emitting sounds of distress, but Sarah was already climbing down, moving quickly before someone got hurt. She dropped the last few feet and landed in a crouch, her knees bent to absorb the impact. The cubs rushed toward her, surrounding her in a circle of scales, fur, and chittering excitement. They weren't threatening, she realized. They were curious, amazed even. Siska was tugging on Sarah's pant leg, pointing upward and chirping in rapid Crithian. Sarah's translator earpiece struggled to keep up. How? How reach sky surface? Teach! Teach! The other cubs echoed the sentiment, their voices overlapping into a cacophony of demand and wonder. The Vorash were circling her, their tails swishing with barely contained energy. Zek was simply staring, his head tilted at an angle that would have been impossible for a human neck. Professor Threndix finally waded into the crowd, his 4 arms spread wide to create space. "Students, contain yourselves. Dr. Chen, I must apologize. I don't understand what has caused this reaction." Sarah looked at the professor, then at the cubs, and something clicked in her mind. She'd read the reports about the species represented here. Crithians were ambush predators from a world of shallow waters and low vegetation. Vorash hunted on plains and in canyons. Threxians were burrowers who struck from below. None of them were climbers. None of their species had evolved to hunt vertically, but humans had. Humans, those persistence-hunting apes from Earth, could climb before they could properly walk. They'd chased their prey up trees, scaled cliffs for eggs and honey, and eventually conquered mountains because they were there. To these predator cubs, seeing Sarah scale that wall wasn't just impressive. It was revolutionary. It was like watching someone casually walk through walls or breathe underwater. She had accessed a dimension of hunting space that their instincts told them existed, but their bodies had never been able to reach. Sarah knelt down, bringing herself to eye level with Siska. "You want to learn how to climb?" The cubs erupted in affirmative noises. Even Professor Threndix seemed intrigued, his compound eyes focusing on her with new interest. Over the next hour, Sarah forgot about xenobiology lessons and ecosystem balance. Instead, she taught predator cubs how to climb. She showed them how to distribute their weight, how to use 3 points of contact, how to read a surface for the best grip points. She demonstrated on the furniture first, then helped them one by one. Crithian claws, it turned out, were excellent for gripping, but their leg structure made vertical climbing awkward. Sarah worked with them on technique, showing them how to use their powerful tails for balance. The Vorash were natural climbers once they understood the principle. Their retractable claws and flexible spines giving them an advantage Sarah almost envied. Zek struggled the most, his species being the least adapted for it, but his determination was fierce. By the end of the session, Siska had managed to climb onto a storage unit that stood chest-high to Sarah. The little Crithian was trembling with pride and excitement, chirping triumphantly from her perch. The other cubs gathered below, looking up at their classmate with the same wonder they'd shown Sarah earlier. Then they all tried to follow, and soon the storage unit was covered in climbing predator cubs, each one scrambling for purchase and height. Professor Threndix approached Sarah, his voice translator carrying a tone of bemused respect. "In 30 cycles of teaching predator youth, I have never seen them so engaged. You have given them something I did not know they lacked." Sarah watched as Zek finally managed to pull himself up beside Siska, his usual stoic demeanor broken by what could only be described as a grin. "They're hunters," she said simply. "Hunters are always looking for new ways to reach prey. I just showed them there's a whole dimension they'd been missing." The professor's translator hummed thoughtfully. "Yes, but more than that, I think. You showed them that limitations can be overcome, that instinct can be expanded, that a predator from a species not designed for climbing can still learn to climb." When the session ended and the cubs were collected by their pod parents, each one bounded up to Sarah to touch her hand or arm, a gesture of respect she'd learned was significant among predator species. They were still chattering about climbing, about height, about reaching the sky surface. Siska's pod parent, a full-grown Crithian warrior whose scales bore the scars of military service, approached Sarah last. Through the translator, her voice was formal but warm. "My daughter speaks of nothing but the human who touches ceilings. You have given her ambition toward new hunting grounds. This is a gift to young predators." After they'd all left, Sarah helped Professor Threndix clean up the classroom. The storage unit now bore countless tiny claw marks, evidence of the afternoon's activities. "I think I should apologize," Sarah said, running her finger over the scratches. I didn't mean to disrupt your lesson. Professor Threndix's laugh came out as a series of clicking sounds. Disrupt? Dr. Chen, you taught them more about adaptation and evolution in 1 hour than I could have in a month of lectures, though I will need to file an incident report about the furniture. Sarah smiled. Will I be in trouble? On the contrary, I am recommending you lead a new program, Vertical Hunting Techniques for Predator Species Youth. It seems humans have something unique to contribute to galactic education after all. The next day, Sarah found her schedule cleared for a new class, titled Advanced Three-Dimensional Hunting Tactics. When she entered the gymnasium that had been allocated for the program, she found not just her original 7 students, but nearly 30 predator cubs from a dozen different species. They were all looking up at the climbing walls, the suspended obstacles, the ceiling-mounted grips that maintenance had hastily installed overnight. And they were all looking at her with that same expression of wonder and hunger that young predators wore when they'd found new prey. Siska was at the front of the group, her scales practically vibrating with excitement. When she saw Sarah, she chirped loudly and pointed upward. Today, we touch ceiling. Today, we become like human. Sarah looked at the sea of eager faces, at the vertical playground that had been constructed, at the future that was quite literally looking up at her. She thought about humanity's long journey from the trees of Africa to the stars of the galaxy. She thought about how every species brought something unique to the greater community of sapient life. And she thought about how sometimes the greatest gifts were the ones you didn't know you had to give. Sarah clapped her hands together, the sharp sound getting every cub's attention. All right, hunters, let's reach the ceiling together. But first, we're going to learn how to fall safely, because good climbers fall a lot before they learn to fly. As she began the lesson, demonstrating proper falling technique and roll recovery, she didn't see Professor Threndix watching from the observation window above. She didn't see the growing crowd of adult predator species gathering to watch the human teach their young something they'd never dreamed possible. She only saw the cubs, their eyes bright with determination, ready to learn how to conquer a dimension their ancestors had never touched. And in that moment, Sarah understood what it meant to be human in a galaxy full of wonders. It meant showing others that ceilings were just floors you hadn't reached yet.